So let's move on to talk about Mark Zuckerberg. He has made an announcement that Meta will be retiring its independent fact checkers to be replaced with community notes. So this will be rolled out on Facebook, Instagram, and Threads. Tom, there's been a bit of a panic about this. I think it's fair to say that we're now hurtling into an age of unbridled untruths.
Yeah.
What do you make of it?
Well, it's so revealing, isn't it, about what fact-checking meant in the first place. The fact that it's primarily Labour politicians, the members of the kind of liberal left, great and good, who are paralysed with fear about this, is not because these people are really committed to the pursuit of truth and reason at a fundamental level. It's because they recognise, whether they want to admit it or not, that this whole enterprise of tackling misinformation, of the rise of the fact-checkers, the demands that social media companies basically play the role of Ministry of Truth because their users are too gullible and need to be policed in that respect. It's always been a way of enforcing political conformity. It generally only ever went in one direction. Anything that was a bit against the grain, that was a bit anti-establishment, anything that was also an uncomfortable truth was often policed, whether that was in relation to COVID, whether that was in relation to the lab leak, which whilst not proven is certainly very plausible, unlike what the fact checkers originally said about that particular story, or the fact that, up until quite recently, many of these platforms were basically compelling people to speak misinformation because if they misgendered someone, they could have their account suspended permanently. So it's one of those things where the politicised nature of the war on misinformation has been so brutally exposed by all of this. And also the fact that what Zuckerberg is talking about is moving towards a more kind of X-like system where you basically have users themselves being able to appraise certain claims. That works very well on a platform like X. It's infinitely better than the fact-checking organisations that were employed to do it on the platforms previously. It's just a demonstration that this was never really about policing misinformation, but also this was fundamentally about mistrust of the users rather than anything else.
And, the fact that the mis and disinformation panic stems directly from 2016, from the votes for Brexit and Trump. And you can tell that. You can do one of those Google Ngram searches, which is where you can find out how often, it's basically, you can generate a graph and see how often people use a certain word in the media and on websites and stuff. It explodes. The words mis and disinformation basically not used at all in public life before 2016. Suddenly, Trump, Brexit, they have a culprit, It's because people were misinformed. It's because people don't know what, people were lied to. Yeah. People are, heaven forbid, people are talking nonsense on the internet. I mean, as if that had never happened before. This entirely new phenomenon.
But now it's dangerous.
Exactly. It's dangerous. And then with COVID, it became deadly.
Yes.
To say the wrong thing about COVID, you're literally killing people with your words. I mean, Emily,
It shows how superficial it all was. It wasn't Mark Zuckerberg thinking that this is really important that we fact check and make sure there's no misinformation for the benefit of humankind. Because if it were that, then he wouldn't change just because the wind has started blowing in another direction. Yeah. So at the end of the day, Mark Zuckerberg, I don't know what his politics really are. I don't even know if he really cares for that type of thing. I think he's just thinking, you know what, Trump's going to be in power. X is doing quite well with things going like this. I want a bit of the action and I'm going to change in that way because that's the way the wind's blowing.
Yeah.
And if it were to blow in the other direction, he'd probably go the other way. But it's very, very interesting. And this is how things are going to shift in a lot of different ways, I imagine.
Yeah, definitely. The big vibe shift, as lots of people have called it. But it's true.
We're stuck in a very different vibe in the UK at the moment. Not as spiked, but in general.
Well, it's true that, there are other signs of Zuckerberg sort of sucking up to Trump. He has appointed Dana White, the UFC CEO, to the board of Meta, who is a big Trump ally.
Nick Clegg got the boot.
Nick Clegg has got the boot.
Yeah.
Good riddance.
He's going to get Hulk Hogan as head of trust and safety or something. That'll be the next move.
But he's given an enormous amount of money to Trump's inauguration. So there is
so funny.
a slightly, although it's good news that we're going to have a bit more freedom of speech on Meta. There is a slightly unseemly doffing of the cap to the new, centre of power.
Yeah, I mean, and that was always the story with big tech censorship. So, definitely where Meta and Zuckerberg was concerned, because there was this kind of sense that what was going on with a lot of this speech policing was that you had Mark Zuckerberg and this kind of handful of oligarchs who were imposing their ideology on the masses. I think that's certainly true of certain people who worked at these platforms, but a lot of the time it was in response to the hysteria of Democratic politicians, the New York Times, and he was just kind of slowly harangued into tightening up his policies. It wasn't even that long ago that he was trying to hold on to this idea that we shouldn't police speech, not out of any real principled position, but because I think he realised that if Facebook becomes the Ministry of Truth, that's just going to be both an impossible and a thankless task.
Yeah.
So he was kind of dragged kicking and screaming towards this situation, and now that he's gone out, I think he's been quite willing to take it. There is, of course, the political environment. It is fair to say that both Democrats and Republicans in recent years have been calling on the big tech giants to either be regulated or to be broken up if they don't get their house in order. For the Democrats, that was censoring more. For the Republicans, it tends to be censoring less, but nevertheless, that's how it's panned out. But I think the vibe shift thing is also real. I think there's an element of these companies recognising that, first of all, they don't have to deal with this kind of hornet's nest anymore because through the re-election of Trump and through the culture shifting, there's a kind of recognition that this was never a bottom-up demand from our users. This is something that was very much coming from the top. And whilst there are obvious elements of cynicism in it, it's clearly in response to the fact that the atmosphere and the mood has changed. And that's not necessarily just because of Trump the individual. It's about the people who decide to vote for him. And it's about the fact that ordinary people have demanded this change in a sense. But it is a reminder, though, that we are, when we're talking about online free speech, we are basically subject to the sort of whims of billionaires still.
Yeah.
Who owns what platform at what particular time and what political party are they looking to curry favour with? It's not an ideal situation, but I don't think we can count out the role that users and ordinary people have played in kind of starting to turn the tanker ship around a little bit.
Definitely, and it's a step in the right direction, and it is worth just recalling how censorious, say, Twitter was before Elon Musk, or Facebook has been until recently. I mean, you mentioned, Tom, banning gender-critical feminists. I mean, Facebook has explicitly, or Meta has explicitly said you're now allowed to call transgender people mentally ill. I don't know why that specifically is considered to be so important to say, but you are allowed to say it now.
No, because when I was listening to what Mark Zuckerberg, his little announcement, the two things I heard were immigration and gender, as if suddenly, I don't know, the whole world has decided that those two issues you can have a disagreement
about. They weren't important
about.
before.
I mean, so utterly bizarre, isn't it? The way he just, speaks. But I guess he's a tech head. Yeah. So there you go. Perhaps a bit of an odd bloke, but I think.
I like his new look. I don't know what you make.
You like his new look, do you?
Gen Z.
Yeah, he's a cool dude. He's a cool dude. But yeah, I mean, I worry what this means for us here, because I imagine Keir Starmer and his cabinet are very worried indeed about the power that X in particular is having right now, and the speed at which the national debate is changing and going against him and his way of doing things. Will there be an attempt to clamp down, or will that just look ridiculous when everything's changing so dramatically in the States? Will he hold off? I don't know.
Yeah,